What the millionaire saw in that young woman's eyes, no one expected that such a guarded man could completely let his walls down. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what happened between them will make you believe in true love again. When Willa stepped into the muddy puddle so the elderly woman wouldn't wet her feet, not noticing that she was staining her only good dress, he watched from the window of his imported Porsche with something he had never felt before, a pang in his chest that he couldn't identify. That ordinary scene on a rainy autumn morning on the Upper East Side of Manhattan would forever change two destinies that seemed impossible to cross. Raindrops drummed against the tinted glass of the car with a hypnotic rhythm, while Donovan observed the brown-haired young woman who was now helping the elderly lady cross the street with a smile that illuminated the grey morning. At 39 years old, Donovan had built a crystal empire over 15 years where every decision was calculated, every relationship had a purpose, and every smile hid a negotiation. His Italian suits cost more than many American families earned in a year, and his penthouse on Fifth Avenue was decorated with works of art by Hopper and Pollock that few could name. Three characteristics defined his existence: a deep cynicism about human nature, an inability to genuinely trust anyone, and an emptiness that all the money in the world couldn't fill. His internal conflict was a silent war. He despised the superficiality of the world he had created, but didn't know how to exist outside of it. Each business meeting in the most exclusive restaurants on Madison Avenue, each social event in the ballrooms of Manhattan's high society, each million-dollar transaction left him with the same bitter taste. It was like drinking the finest champagne without being able to taste anything but emptiness. Willa, at just 21 years old, carried an unwavering sincerity that bordered on the impossible in current times. She worked as an assistant in a small community library in Greenwich Village, on the ground floor of the same building where his office was located, but their universes had never touched until that moment. Her natural compassion made her stop to prepare coffee for the elderly library patrons, remembering their names and the novels by Steinbeck and Fitzgerald they preferred. The rain began to subside when Willa disappeared into the building's entrance, taking with her the image of her stained dress and her selfless gesture. Donovan remained motionless in his Porsche, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel, feeling something that his world of numbers and contracts had never allowed him to feel: genuine curiosity about another human being. There are gestures so small that the world ignores them, but that possess the power to awaken what we believed dormant forever. That morning, unknowingly, Willa had planted a seed in the armored heart of a man who had forgotten how to feel. During the following weeks, Donovan discovered they shared the same historic building every day, without ever truly seeing each other. The irony was so evident, it drew a bitter smile from him as he signed documents in his 10th floor office, knowing she was directly below in that small refuge of old books. The building was an architectural gem from the 1920s, with Art Deco facades and vintage elevators that told stories of a New York that no longer existed. Inside, the marble floors had witnessed thousands of footsteps over decades, but never an encounter as unlikely as the one about to happen. Donovan began adjusting his schedule almost obsessively. He learned that Willa always arrived 15 minutes early to water the ferns at the building's entrance, plants that no one else noticed, but that she cared for as if they were her children. He watched her from his office window, observing how she talked to the plants while watering them, how her lips moved in what seemed to be a one-sided conversation full of tenderness. "This is absurd," he muttered to himself, pulling away from the window with a sharp movement. Completely absurd, but the next day he was there again, watching. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the cafe downstairs mixed with the smell of old books rising up the stairs, creating an atmosphere he was beginning to associate with her invisible but omnipresent presence. His secretary, Lenora, an efficient middle-aged woman who had worked with him for 10 years, noticed the change immediately. "Mr. Sterling, you have the meeting with the Japanese investors at 10, she reminded him one morning, finding him standing by the window instead of reviewing financial reports as he usually did. "Cancel it," he responded, without taking his eyes off the exterior. "Excuse me? I said cancel it. Reschedule for next week." When Lenora left the office, Donovan made a decision that defied all his business logic. He would go down to visit that library he had completely ignored for years. The descent down the marble stairs seemed endless to him. Each step was a step toward unknown territory, toward a world that his social position had carefully kept away. The sound of his Italian shoes echoed in the silence of the old building, an echo that seemed to announce his arrival to a realm where he didn't belong. The library's solid wood door had a discreet sign: Whitman Community Library, open 9:00 a.m. to 8:01 p.m. Donovan took a deep breath, aware that he was about to cross a threshold that had nothing to do with the physical. When he pushed the door, the smell of old paper hit him with unexpected force. It was an aroma he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps decades, that briefly transported him to a childhood he preferred not to remember. Dark wooden shelves extended throughout the room, filled with books whose worn spines spoke of thousands of hands that had caressed them with love. And there at the counter in the back was she. Willa looked up from the book she was cataloguing, and her hazel eyes met his. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She smiled at him with a warmth that expected neither recognition nor reward, simply offering genuine hospitality to another visitor. "Good morning," she said with a soft voice that seemed made for whispering between pages. "Can I help you with something?" Donovan realized he hadn't prepared any excuse, any logical reason to be there. For the first time in years, he found himself speechless, completely disarmed before this young woman who looked at him with kind curiosity. He began, feeling that the $5,000 suit suddenly weighed too much. "I work upstairs, in the building, and I thought I'd never visited this library." Willa smiled more broadly, and that simple gesture made something inside him stir. "Well, welcome. Are you looking for something in particular, or would you prefer to browse?" Sometimes the simplest words open the most complex doors, and sometimes a sincere smile can dismantle years of carefully constructed armor. The following days became a careful dance of seemingly casual encounters. Donovan began going down to the library with a regularity that surprised even Lenora, who watched him with a mixture of concern and growing curiosity. "I need to research the publishing market," he invented, knowing his excuses were transparent, but unable to stop himself. The library became an unexpected refuge. The soft sound of turning pages, the murmur of elderly people commenting on the news in low voices, the creak of old chairs when sitting, everything composed a symphony that contrasted drastically with the aggressive silence of his minimalist office upstairs. Willa treated each visitor with the same dedicated attention. Donovan watched her as she helped an elderly woman find the continuation of a romance series, how her delicate hands organized the shelves with almost reverent care, how her eyes shone when talking about stories she loved. One afternoon, while pretending to read a book about modern architecture that he barely processed, Donovan overheard a conversation that made him stop. "Miss Willa, do you believe in true love?" asked a teenager who frequented the library after school. Willa stopped in the middle of placing a book on its shelf, and a thoughtful expression crossed her face. "I believe in kindness that's chosen every day," she responded, with a voice carrying deep conviction. "I believe in people who look beyond what they see, who search for what's true behind appearances. If that's love, then yes, I believe in it." Donovan felt those words pierce him like an accurate arrow. He had spent years surrounded by people who only saw his bank account, his position, his usefulness. When was the last time someone had tried to see beyond? 3 months passed before he gathered the courage to invite her to dinner. 3 months of brief conversations about books he didn't really read, of smiles shared when their gazes accidentally crossed, of a growing tension he didn't know how to name. The day he finally did it, he had rehearsed the words for hours. He waited until the library was almost empty, with only the golden light of sunset entering through the high windows, illuminating the dust particles floating in the air like tiny suns. "Willa," he began, and his voice sounded more hoarse than intended. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me. There's a restaurant in Midtown, the best in Manhattan. I could—" She looked up from the book she was cataloguing, and in her eyes he saw something he didn't expect. Not excitement at the prospect of luxury, but a gentle sadness. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Sterling," she responded softly. "But that's not my world. I wouldn't feel comfortable in a place like that." The rejection hit him with unexpected force. Not because of wounded ego, but because he realized she had seen exactly what he was, A man who thought money could buy anything, including the attention of someone genuine. "I understand," he murmured, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. "I apologize if—" "But," Willa interrupted, and a small smile played on her lips, "if you really want to get to know me, there's a diner around the corner. They make the best grilled cheese in the neighborhood. We could share a simple meal, if that appeals to you." Donovan stared at her, processing what had just happened. She wasn't rejecting him, she was rejecting the artificial world he represented. She was offering something no one had offered him in years: authenticity. "That sounds perfect," he responded, and for the first time in decades, his smile was completely sincere. That night, sitting in a small diner with worn formica tables and paper napkins, surrounded by the aroma of bacon and coffee, the noise of normal families and couples, Donovan Sterling began to understand that he had been searching in the wrong places his entire life. Willa talked about her love of stories, about how each book was a universe waiting to be explored. Her eyes shone with a passion he had forgotten existed, a capacity to marvel at the simple that made every word sound like poetry. "And you?" she asked, leaning slightly over the table. "What truly moves you, beyond business?" The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that in years. Everyone assumed his passion was money, power, success. He opened his mouth to respond with some rehearsed phrase, but the words that came out surprised even him. "I don't know," he admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice was palpable. I think I forgot a long time ago." Willa extended her hand across the table, and her fingers brushed his with a softness that made him shiver. "Then maybe it's time to remember," she said with a smile that contained both hope and challenge. "In the meeting of two opposite worlds, sometimes the richest discovers he's the poorest, and the humblest teaches the most valuable lesson, that the heart doesn't understand hierarchies." The weeks that followed were like waking from a 15-year dream. Donovan discovered that Willa agreed to walk with him through Central Park on Sundays, where the sound of dry leaves under their feet and the aroma of roasted chestnuts from street vendors created an atmosphere he had never experienced. "When I was a child," Willa shared as they walked beside the lake, watching families rowing in boats, "I used to imagine that New York was a magical place, a place where dreams could come true if you worked honestly and kept your heart pure." "And now?" Donovan asked, genuinely curious. "Does it still seem magical to you?" She stopped, her profile illuminated by the golden autumn sunset light. A strand of brown hair escaped from behind her ear, and he had to restrain the impulse to tuck it back. "Sometimes magic is in the small things," she responded. "In a neighbor's greeting, in the smell of fresh bagels from the corner bakery, in being able to help someone find the perfect book they needed to read. I don't need big things to believe in magic." Donovan felt a pang of something like envy. She had so little in material terms, but possessed something he had lost decades ago: the ability to find joy in the everyday. They talked about everything during those walks. Willa shared memories of her simple childhood, of values she kept as treasure. Donovan, for the first time, talked about the loneliness he felt even when surrounded by people during sumptuous business gatherings. The 18-year difference between them seemed to disappear when they were together, as if their souls were the same age, but reality didn't take long to strike with brutal force. Donovan's mother, Constance Sterling Monroe, was a woman of Manhattan's high society who had dedicated her entire life to building and maintaining an image of impeccable distinction. When she found out, through the inevitable gossip of social circles, that her son was seeing a librarian, her reaction was immediate and calculated. "Donovan, darling," she called one afternoon, her voice smooth as poison wrapped in velvet, "I've organized a family dinner this Saturday. Small, intimate. So I'd love for you to bring your friend." He knew his mother too well not to detect the trap, but a part of him, naive and hopeful, thought that perhaps Willa could soften even the hardest heart. The night of the dinner, Constance's penthouse on Park Avenue gleamed with the opulence of someone with too much money and too much time. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the paintings by American masters adorning the walls. The table was set with authentic French porcelain and silver cutlery dating back to the 19th century. Willa arrived in a simple but elegant dress, the same one she had bought at a thrift shop and altered herself. Her hands trembled slightly as Donovan helped her remove her coat, and he whispered, "Everything will be fine. Just be yourself." But it wasn't fine. Donovan's mother was a master in the art of veiled cruelty. Each question she asked sounded cordial on the surface, but carried hidden barbs designed to wound. "How charming, dear," Constance said as they served the first course, her smile perfectly practiced. "A librarian. So noble. I imagine there isn't much money in that, is there?" "It allows me to do what I love," Willa responded with dignity, though Donovan noticed how her knuckles turned white gripping the fork. "Of course, love for work is admirable," Constance continued, her tone sweet as poisoned sugar. "Though I must say it's refreshing to see someone so young. 18 years is quite a considerable difference, don't you think, Donovan? You could almost be her father." The comment fell on the table like a silent bomb. Donovan felt rage bubbling in his chest, but Willa remained composed, though he saw the flush rise up her neck. "Age is just a number when two people truly connect," Donovan intervened, his voice tense. "Oh, without doubt," Constance laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "But the world is cruel, dear. People talk, and in our circles, well, appearance is everything." The dinner continued as refined torture. Each course was accompanied by seemingly innocent comments about class differences, about the importance of belonging to the right kind of family, about how some people simply didn't understand the world Donovan was born into. Willa endured everything with a dignity that broke Donovan's heart. She responded with grace, maintained composure, smiled when appropriate. But he could see the pain accumulating in her eyes, like storm clouds in a sky that had been clear. When they finally left the building, well past midnight, Willa walked several steps ahead, wrapped in her coat as if it could protect her from the cold that had penetrated to her bones. "Willa, please." Donovan caught up with her, gently touching her arm. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. My mother is—" "No," she interrupted, and when she turned to look at him, there were silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "You don't need to apologize for her. But I need to think." "Think about what?" "About whether this can really work," her voice broke. "About whether I'm strong enough to be in a world that clearly doesn't want me." "I want you." The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. "That's the only thing that matters." Willa looked at him with a sadness that seemed too old for her 21 years. "I wish it were that simple," she whispered. That night, Donovan faced a choice he had never had to make before, between what was expected of him and what his heart asked for the first time in decades. The most difficult battles aren't fought with swords, but with hearts. And sometimes, the battlefield is an elegant dining table where words wound deeper than any weapon. The following days were a whirlwind of silence and reflection. Willa asked for space, and for the first time in his professional life, Donovan couldn't concentrate on absolutely anything. Financial reports blurred before his eyes, meetings passed as a distant hum that couldn't penetrate the fog of his mind. Lenora found him one afternoon staring out the window toward the building where he knew Willa was working, so close and so unreachable at the same time. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, with a maternal gentleness she rarely showed, "in all the years I've worked for you, I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" he asked without taking his eyes off the exterior. "Alive." The word hit him with an uncomfortable truth. She was right. For 15 years he had been a well-dressed automaton, moving through life with mechanical efficiency, but without truly feeling anything. That night, Donovan made a decision that would challenge his entire world. He cancelled his attendance at the most important charity gala of the year, an event where all of Manhattan's elite businessmen were expected to be present. Instead, he walked to the small apartment Willa shared with 2 roommates in a modest Brooklyn neighborhood. The building was old, with walls that needed painting and stairs that creaked with every step. But when he knocked on the door and Willa opened it, her eyes red evidencing she had been crying, none of that mattered. "I'm not going to let my mother or anyone else dictate how I should live my life," he said without preamble. "I'm not going to let you go because she thinks you don't belong to her world. Her world is empty, Willa. It's beautiful on the outside and completely hollow inside." "Donovan—" "No, let me finish," he continued, his voice loaded with an emotion he had repressed for too long. "These last months with you have taught me more about living than all the previous years combined. You look at me and don't see a bank account. You ask me questions no one else asks. You care about who I really am, not what I have." Willa looked at him with fresh tears welling up, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of pain, but of something more complex, deeper. "But your family, your social position," she began. "To hell with all of that." The words sounded raw, liberating. "I chose that life years ago out of fear, to follow expectations I never questioned. But I'm not going to keep choosing it. I choose you. I choose this, whatever this is." Willa opened the door completely, inviting him into the small apartment that smelled of fresh coffee and old books. It was tiny compared to his penthouse, with second-hand furniture, and walls decorated with cheap posters of famous paintings. But there was something in that space that his luxurious residence had never had: human warmth. "My mother died when I was 5, Willa shared as she served him tea in mismatched mugs. "I don't remember her well, just fragments. A lullaby, the smell of her cheap perfume, the softness of her hands. My father, he did what he could, but he was a broken man. He worked 3 jobs to support us, but the pain of losing my mother consumed him slowly." Donovan listened in silence, holding the warm mug between his hands, feeling that each of Willa's words was a gift of trust. "When I turned 8, he got sick. We didn't have money for treatments, for medicines. The sisters of an orphanage in upstate New York took me in when he couldn't take care of me anymore. They never told me exactly what happened to him after. I think it was easier not to know." "Willa," Donovan whispered, feeling his heart break for the girl she had been, for everything she had lost. "The sisters taught me that family isn't blood," she continued, her voice firm despite the tears. "It's choice. It's love given freely, without expecting anything in return. They taught me to see beauty where others see scarcity, to find joy in simple traditions. That's why your world scares me so much. Not because it's rich or luxurious, but because it seems to value everything opposite to what I learned to believe." Donovan set the mug aside and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Then teach me," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Teach me to see the world as you see it, because my way of seeing it has left me empty for too long." That night marked a before and after. Willa agreed to give him a real chance, not to millionaire Donovan Sterling, but to the man who was beginning to emerge behind the carefully constructed facade. But the consequences of his decision didn't take long to arrive. Constance, furious at her son's public slight in missing the gala, began a subtle but devastating campaign within her social circles. Rumors about the gold digger who had trapped the successful businessman began to circulate. Business partners began to question Donovan's judgment. Invitations to exclusive events began to dwindle. Donovan realized, with a mixture of horror and liberation, that his crystal world was beginning to crack. And the most surprising thing was that he didn't care as much as he thought he should. Sometimes what seems like a loss is actually a liberation. And sometimes the cracks in our perfect life let in exactly the light we needed. Willa's 22nd birthday fell on a Saturday in November, when New York dressed in deep autumn and the streets smelled of roasted chestnuts and recent rain. Donovan had planned for weeks what he considered the perfect gift: a diamond necklace from an exclusive jewelry store on Madison Avenue, delicate but elegant, that had cost more than she would earn in 5 years. He imagined her smile, the shine in her eyes upon seeing something so beautiful, but Donovan still didn't fully understand Willa. When he presented the blue velvet box during a dinner at her apartment, prepared by her with modest ingredients but made with love, Willa's reaction wasn't what he expected. Her eyes filled with tears as she opened the box and saw the necklace gleam under the candlelight, but they weren't tears of joy. "Donovan, it's beautiful," she said with a trembling voice, "but I can't accept it." "Why not?" he asked, genuinely confused. "I want to give you beautiful things. I want you to have everything you deserve." Willa closed the box gently, as if it contained something fragile that could break. "Because this isn't who I am," she explained, and there was so much pain in her voice that Donovan felt something inside him tear. "Don't misunderstand me, I deeply appreciate the gesture, the thought behind it. But this necklace that could feed all the families in my neighborhood for months, it could fix the library's roof that leaks every time it rains. It could—" She stopped, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. "I don't want you to think I don't value your generosity," she continued. "But if you really know me, if you really see me, then you'd know that this isn't what makes me happy. I don't need diamonds to feel loved." The truth of her words hit him like a hammer. He had made the same mistake he always made, thinking that money could buy what really mattered. "What do you want then?" he asked, feeling lost. "Tell me what would make you happy." Willa smiled through her tears, taking his hands in hers. "Your time, your honesty, your real presence, not just physical, but emotional. I want you to tell me your fears, your dreams that have nothing to do with money or business. I want to walk with you in Central Park, and for you to really look at the trees, to listen to the sound of water in the lake, to feel the wind on your face. That's what I want." Donovan remained silent, processing. Finally, he nodded. "What should we do with the necklace?" "Sell it," Willa suggested gently, "and donate the money to the library. Or better yet, use it to create a scholarship fund for kids in the neighborhood who need books but can't afford them. Do it in your mother's name." "In my mother's name?" he repeated, surprised. "Why would I do that?" "Because maybe it's time you understand that even people who hurt us are acting from their own pain," Willa responded. And there was a wisdom in her words that belied her youth. "Your mother doesn't really know you, Donovan. She sees what she thinks you should be, not what you could be. And that's sad for both of you. Maybe a gesture of genuine love, directed towards something that really matters, could begin to build a bridge." That night, Donovan sold the necklace. He created a scholarship fund in the name of Constance Sterling Monroe for underprivileged children in Greenwich Village. When his mother found out, the phone call was brief and cold, but Donovan detected something in her voice he had never heard before. Surprise, perhaps the beginning of something that could become understanding. The real birthday gift he gave Willa was different. A leather-bound journal handmade by a local artisan, with blank pages waiting to be filled with her thoughts, her poems, her dreams. And inside a handwritten letter, where he expressed what she had taught him in just 6 months, that a person's value isn't measured by what they possess, but by what they freely give. Willa cried when she read it, but this time they were tears of genuine happiness. "This," she whispered, pressing the letter against her chest, "this is the most valuable gift anyone has ever given me. True love isn't demonstrated with gleaming diamonds, but with gestures that illuminate the soul. It's not about giving what's most expensive, but offering what's most valuable. Time, attention, presence, and the willingness to truly see whom we love." Winter came to New York with unusual ferocity, bringing with it not just cold and rain, but also the collapse of everything Donovan had built over 15 years. It began with a real estate investment that turned out to be fraudulent. A partner he had trusted, Richard Ashford Kent, a man from high society with surnames dating back to old New England money, had been systematically diverting funds for months. When the truth came to light, it dragged down not just millions of dollars, but also the reputation of everyone who had invested with him. Donovan was among the most affected. "It's impossible," he muttered while reviewing documents in his office, the numbers dancing before his eyes like a nightmare that refused to end. "I reviewed every contract, every clause." Lenora was at his side, her face pale as she tallied the losses on her tablet. "Mr. Sterling, the losses they're catastrophic. 70% of your liquid assets are compromised. Investors are demanding answers. Banks are calling the loans. This—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant: ruin. In the following weeks, Donovan experienced a fall that had been unthinkable months before. The penthouse overlooking Central Park had to be put up for sale. The Porsche, symbol of his success, was returned. The artworks decorating his walls were sent to auction houses to generate desperately needed liquidity. Calls from partners and friends ceased. Invitations to events disappeared. People who had laughed at his mediocre jokes and validated each of his opinions suddenly weren't returning his messages. The crystal world he had lived in didn't just crack, it shattered. For the first time in his adult life, Donovan experienced the real fear of not knowing what tomorrow would bring. One night, sitting in the nearly empty apartment he had temporarily rented in a modest Brooklyn neighborhood, far from the luxury he was accustomed to, he allowed himself to cry. Tears he had repressed for decades, not just for the loss of money, but for the wasted time, for the superficial relationships, for the years lived without truly living. The doorbell rang past midnight. When he opened the door, Willa was there, with a container in her hands and tears in her eyes. "I heard," she said simply. "Can I come in?" She didn't wait for an answer. She entered the Spartan apartment, where the only furniture was a folding table and 2 chairs Donovan had bought at a thrift store. The difference from the opulent penthouse was so stark, it was almost comical. "I made mac and cheese," Willa announced, opening the container. "It's nothing special, just pasta, cheese, a little cream. But it's made with love," Donovan completed, his voice hoarse. "I know." They sat on the cold floor because there weren't enough chairs, eating directly from the container because Donovan hadn't bought plates yet. The silence between them was loaded with wordless understanding. "You could leave," Donovan said finally, looking into her eyes. "I'm not the successful millionaire anymore. I don't have anything to offer except yourself," Willa interrupted firmly. "And that's the only thing I've ever wanted." Donovan felt something break inside him, but this time it wasn't painful. It was liberating. "You don't understand," he continued, needing her to comprehend the magnitude of what he had lost. "I've lost everything. My company, my position, your armor," Willa said softly. "You've lost the armor that separated you from the real world. And I know it hurts, Donovan. I know it's scary. But look at yourself now. Really look. For the first time since I've known you, I see you vulnerable. I see you human. I see you real. And that makes you stay?" he asked, genuinely confused. "The fact that I'm a failure now?" Willa took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You're not a failure. You lost money, you didn't lose your value as a person, and I stay because I can finally see the man I always knew was underneath all those expensive suits and that perfect facade. I stay because I love you, not for what you have, but for who you are when everything else is stripped away." That night, huddled on the cold floor of the empty apartment, with just a shared blanket and each other's warmth, Donovan finally understood what Willa had known all along, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the presence of someone who loves you, even when you've lost everything. "We'll rebuild," Willa whispered against his chest. "But this time, we'll do it the right way, with humility, with integrity, with real purpose." And for the first time in months, Donovan felt something like hope. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find the only thing that truly matters. In the ruins of what we were, we can build something infinitely more valuable, the truth of who we can become. The following months were the most difficult and simultaneously the most transformative of Donovan's life. Willa became his teacher in the art of living with less but feeling more. She taught him to shop at farmers' markets, where vendors called out prices for their fresh produce and the smell of fresh fish mixed with the aroma of spices. She showed him how to bargain with respect, how to choose the ripest tomatoes, how a simple meal prepared with fresh ingredients could taste better than any 5-star restaurant dish. "The secret," Willa explained as they cooked together in the small apartment kitchen, "isn't in how expensive the ingredients are, but in the care you prepare them with. My grandmother used to say food tastes like the emotions of whoever cooks it." Donovan discovered that washing dishes could be meditative, that the sound of running water, the slippery texture of soap, the simple act of cleaning and drying could be a form of therapy. He learned to fold his own clothes instead of sending them to the dry cleaner, to iron his own shirts, while listening to music on an old radio Willa had rescued from a thrift shop. But the hardest lesson was facing the reality of manual labor. Without his business empire, he needed real income. Willa helped him get a job at a small antique furniture restoration workshop in Brooklyn, owned by an older man named Earl, who had no idea who Donovan Sterling had been. "Ever worked with wood before?" Earl asked skeptically, observing Donovan's hands soft and without calluses. "No," Donovan admitted, "but I'm a fast learner." The first day was humiliating. His hands, accustomed only to signing contracts and typing on expensive computers, blistered within hours. The penetrating smell of varnish gave him a headache. Wood dust got in his eyes, his throat, making him cough. He arrived at the apartment that night exhausted, his hands bleeding and his pride in pieces. Willa was waiting for him with a bucket of warm water and Epsom salts. "Give me your hands," she asked gently. As he soaked his aching hands in the water, Willa told him about her own first day at the library years ago. "I was 18 and thought it would be easy, but carrying boxes of books for hours left my back destroyed. I cried in the bathroom during lunch, sure I couldn't continue. But I did, And over time I became stronger, not just physically, but inside. How? Donovan asked, looking at his wrinkled hands in the water. How did you find the strength? By remembering why I was doing it, she responded. I wasn't working just for money. I worked because I loved books, because every day I helped someone find a story they needed. You have to find your why, Donovan. Why are you doing this? He thought for a long time before answering. To prove I can, he finally admitted. To prove to myself that I'm more than my bank account. To be someone you can be proud of. Willa lifted his hands from the water, dried them carefully, and kissed each blister gently. I'm already proud of you, she whispered. Because you're trying. Because you didn't give up. As the weeks passed, Donovan began to find a rhythm. His hands developed calluses. His muscles adapted to the physical work. He learned the difference between oak and pine by touch. Discovered that restoring an old table and returning its original beauty brought a satisfaction that closing $1 million deal never had. Earl, tough but fair, began to trust him with more valuable pieces. You've got a good eye, he grunted one day. For someone who never worked with his hands, you learn fast. But not everything was positive transformation. There were dark days. Days when Donovan found himself staring at his reflection in the building's shared bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. He had lost weight. His skin was tanned from sometimes working outdoors. His hands showed the marks of honest work. But his eyes had changed more than anything. There was no longer cynicism in them, but there also wasn't the spark of confidence that used to define him. In their place there was something more fragile: uncertainty. On a particularly difficult night, when a mistake in restoring a table cost him a week's salary, Donovan completely broke down. I can't do this, he confessed to Willa, his voice broken. I'm not strong enough, I'm not good enough, everything I touch I ruin. Willa held him while he cried, her hand caressing his back in soft circles. Failure doesn't define you, she murmured. How you get up after failure, that's what matters. Earl didn't fire you, did he? He told you to learn from your mistake. That's a lesson, not an ending. But I'm tired, Donovan admitted. Tired of fighting, of trying to be someone I don't know if I can be. Then rest, Willa responded simply. You don't have to be strong all the time, that's why I'm here. You can lean on me when you need to, just as I leaned on you when I was sick. The reminder of Willa's illness brought with it a wave of perspective. She had faced something much scarier than loss of money or status, and had done it with a grace he was barely beginning to understand. True strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up each time we do. And sometimes, the bravest act is admitting we need help, that we can't do it alone, that it's okay to be human and fragile. Spring came to New York with the promise of renewal, but brought with it a trial neither of them anticipated. Willa had been feeling tired for weeks, attributing it to overwork at the library and the stress of recent months supporting Donovan in his transformation. But when she began having unexplained fevers and constant pain that wouldn't subside with common medications, Donovan insisted she see a doctor. The diagnosis was a serious infection that had gone unnoticed for too long, compromising her immune system. She needed immediate hospitalization. For Donovan, seeing Willa in a hospital bed was like reliving all his worst nightmares. Mount Sinai Hospital, with its impersonal white corridors and the penetrating smell of disinfectant, became his new world during the following weeks. You don't need to stay, Willa whispered with a weak voice, her skin pale against the white sheets. You have work, I have nothing more important than this, Donovan interrupted, carefully taking her hand, conscious of the IV stuck in her wrist. Nothing. The nights were the hardest. Donovan dozed in an uncomfortable chair beside her bed, waking with every sound of the heart monitor, every time a nurse came in to check her vital signs. The sound of that monitor, with its constant beep confirming she was still alive, became his metronome marking each beat of his own heart. Willa, even in her weakened state, remained who she was. She worried more about him than herself. You need to go home, she insisted, when she saw him with deep circles under his eyes. You need to eat something more than vending machine coffee and crackers. I'll eat when you eat, he responded stubbornly. Donovan, Willa, please, let me be here. Let me take care of you like you took care of me when my world fell apart. It was Earl who unexpectedly appeared one day at the hospital with a bag of homemade food prepared by his wife. The girl told me where to find you, he grunted, though his eyes showed concern. Can't take care of anyone if you starve to death, son. The simple kindness of the gesture made Donovan emotional. This man, whom he'd known for only months, showed more genuine concern than most people he had considered friends for years. Thank you, he murmured, accepting the bag. You don't know how much this means. I know exactly how much it means, Earl responded, patting his shoulder with rough affection. When my wife was sick years ago, friends I hadn't seen since school showed up with food, with company, with help. That's how the world should be. We take care of each other. During the darkest days of Willa's illness, when the fevers refused to subside and doctors spoke in worrying terms about possible complications, Donovan faced a fear deeper than any he had experienced with the loss of his fortune. The possibility of losing her. This woman who had illuminated his life and taught him to truly live, destroyed him in ways he didn't know were possible to feel. One night, when Willa was trembling with high fever and doctors worked urgently to bring down her temperature, Donovan stepped out into the hospital corridor and finally did something he hadn't done in decades. He prayed. He didn't know if he believed in God, if anyone was listening to his desperate pleas. But in that cold, empty corridor, with the sound of medical machines humming around him, he promised anything, everything that remained of his life, in exchange for her living. Please, he whispered, tears running down his face. Don't take her from me. Not yet. Give me time to show her how much I love her. Give me time to be the man she sees in me. As if the universe had listened, or perhaps simply because modern medicine and Willa's young body were resilient, the fever began to subside in the hours before dawn. When the first rays of sun came through the hospital windows, Willa opened her eyes with clarity for the first time in days. Donovan? Her voice was barely a whisper, but to him it sounded like celestial music. I'm here, he responded, taking her hand. I'll always be here. You look terrible, she tried to smile, and he laughed through his tears. You're beautiful, he responded honestly. Recovery was slow. Days that became weeks of gradual progress. Donovan learned to make chamomile tea exactly as she liked it, memorized the stories that made her smile, read her poems by Robert Frost from the small collection he had brought from the library. He watched as the afternoon sunlight drew golden patterns on her face when she finally managed to sit in the chair by the window, overlooking the New York skyline. Each small achievement was celebrated. The first day she could walk without help to the bathroom, the first solid meal she could keep down, the first genuine smile without pain behind it. One afternoon, while reading to her, Willa gently interrupted. You know what's strangest about all this? She asked. What? That despite the pain, the fear, everything, I never felt alone. Every time I opened my eyes, you were here. Every time I was thirsty, you brought me water. Every time I was cold, you adjusted the blankets. And I realized that this is true love. Not the big dramatic gestures, but the silent constancy of someone who simply stays. Donovan closed the poetry book, feeling the weight of her words was deeper than any written verse. I learned from the best, he responded. You stayed when I lost everything. How could I do less for you? In moments of greatest fragility, we discover who we truly are and who truly loves us. Illness doesn't choose, but it reveals. And sometimes, in hospital rooms where life hangs by a thread, we find the purest truth about commitment and devotion. Willa's recovery brought not just relief, but also a deeper intimacy. During one of the long afternoons in the hospital, when she was strong enough to maintain extensive conversations, she finally shared the complete story of her origin that she had kept partially secret until then. I never knew my mother, Willa began, her gaze lost at some point beyond the hospital window. Not in the way I told you before. That story was the simplified version, the one I tell people because it's easier to digest. Donovan leaned forward, giving her his complete attention. The truth is, I was left at the orphanage door when I was just a baby. No note, no explanation. Just a cheap blanket and a silver crucifix the sisters kept for me. They didn't even have my real date of birth. The one I celebrate, November 15th, was estimated by doctors. Willa's voice broke slightly, but she continued. I grew up knowing someone had considered me too heavy a burden to carry. And for years, throughout my entire childhood, that haunted me. I asked questions that had no answers. Was I the problem? Was there something wrong with me that made my mother leave me? Willa, Donovan felt his heart constrict. The sisters were good to me, she continued. Especially Sister Mary, who became the mother figure I never had. She taught me to read with infinite patience, told me stories about saints who had overcome impossible adversities. She told me my value wasn't determined by who left me, but by who I chose to be. She took a deep breath before continuing. But when I turned 15, I found documents. The orphanage kept records of abandoned babies, hoping that someday mothers would return. In my file, there was a medical note. My mother had been a 16-year-old teenager, without resources, without family. The pregnancy almost killed her, and when I was born, she had to choose between her survival and mine. Tears now flowed freely down Willa's face. She chose both. She left me in a place where she knew I'd be cared for, and left before she could change her mind. The social worker who wrote the report said the mother cried so hard she could barely speak, that she said, forgive me, over and over while leaving me. Donovan moved to sit on the edge of the hospital bed, carefully wrapping her in his arms. I spent years angry with her, Willa confessed. Angry for leaving me, for choosing her life over mine. But Sister Mary helped me understand that sometimes the greatest love is letting go. That my mother at 16, alone and scared, made the most difficult decision a mother can make. She loved me enough to give me a chance she couldn't provide. Did you ever try to find her? Donovan asked softly. Willa nodded. When I turned 18, the orphanage helped with the search. We discovered she had died 2 years before in a car accident upstate. She never married, never had other children. A neighbor who knew her said that every November 15th, my estimated birthday, she saw her cry. The silence that followed was loaded with shared pain. That's why you value honesty so much, Donovan understood. That's why every gesture of selfless kindness means so much to you. Exactly, Willa looked at him with shining eyes. I grew up knowing that the most valuable things aren't what we can buy, but what we choose to give freely. Sister Mary's time when she taught me to read, even though she had 50 other children to care for. The patience of Mr. Chen, the baker in town, who let me help him make bread on Saturdays and paid me with sweets and conversation. The compassion of strangers who donated books to the orphanage, giving me entire worlds to explore. She took Donovan's hands in hers. And that's why when I saw you watching me that day in the rain, when I saw you hesitate whether to stay in your Porsche or get out and help too, I saw something in you I recognized. I saw someone who was trapped, who had forgotten how to connect with their humanity. And I thought maybe I could help you find your way back. Donovan realized that from the beginning she had seen him. Not the successful millionaire, not the arrogant businessman, but the lost man who lived behind all that facade. You saved me, he whispered. I didn't even know it, but I was drowning in a life that meant nothing, and you threw me a lifeline. We saved each other, Willa corrected, because you showed me that people can change, that they can grow. You showed me that the walls we build to protect ourselves can be torn down, and that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, that's when we truly begin to live. That conversation marked a turning point. Donovan realized that both had been, in a sense, orphans. He, emotionally abandoned by a family, more concerned with appearances than real connections. She, literally left behind but finding family in unexpected places. And now, in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and hope, they were building something new, a chosen family, based not on blood or obligation, but on conscious choice and unconditional love. When we leave here, Donovan said with a determination he hadn't felt in months, we're going to live differently. Not just survive, but truly live. We're going to build something that matters, something that helps others the way we were helped. What do you have in mind? Willa asked, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. I don't know exactly yet, he admitted, but whatever it is, we'll build it together, with the lessons we've both learned, with the scars we both carry, with the hope we both choose to keep despite everything. Our deepest wounds often become the sources of our greatest compassion. The pain we survive can teach us empathy that comfort never could, and sometimes two broken people find in each other's cracks the light they need to heal. Spring transformed into summer when Willa finally received discharge from the hospital. She had lost weight, her skin was still pale, but her eyes shone with renewed determination. Donovan took her to the Brooklyn apartment, which during her weeks in the hospital he had subtly transformed. Fresh flowers from the farmer's market decorated every available surface. He had installed new curtains that let in the morning sunlight. The small kitchen was stocked with fresh ingredients, ready to prepare nutritious meals. It wasn't luxury, but it was love materialized in careful details. Donovan. Willa looked around with tears in her eyes. This is a home, he completed. Or at least, the beginning of one. The first days of recovery at home were slow but full of small miracles. Donovan had negotiated reduced hours at Earl's workshop to care for Willa. He prepared nutritious soups following recipes he had learned from Earl's wife. He read to her while she rested. He helped her walk around the apartment to regain her strength. But in the quiet afternoons when she napped and he had time to think, Donovan began developing an idea that had been germinating since that conversation in the hospital. One night, while they ate chicken noodle soup and fresh bread, he shared his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said about building something that matters," he began, "and I think I found something." Willa looked at him with interest, a spoonful of soup halfway to her lips. "You remember how you learned your story? How the sisters helped you understand your past?" She nodded. "There are thousands of children in similar situations," Donovan continued, his voice gaining enthusiasm. "In orphanages, in foster homes, in difficult situations, and many of them don't have access to books, to education, to opportunities that could change their lives." "What are you proposing?" Willa asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "I want to create a foundation," he explained. "Small at first, but with a clear purpose. Provide books, scholarships, mentorship programs for children in vulnerable situations. Use my business experience, but this time for something that truly matters." He pulled out an old notebook where he had been making calculations. "I still have some assets, not much, but enough to start. Earl said he could donate some restored furniture to auction. The library could be a distribution point. And you could be the program director if you want. No one understands better what these children need." Willa set down her spoon, her eyes shining with more than tears. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Donovan responded. "I spent 15 years building an empire for myself that turned out to be a house of cards. It's time to build something real, something lasting, something that helps others find what I found with you. Hope." That night marked the birth of Bridges of Hope, a foundation dedicated to providing educational resources and emotional support to children in vulnerable situations. The name was Willa's idea, inspired by her conviction that love and education could build bridges between a painful past and a future full of possibilities. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Donovan used every connection he had left, every skill he had developed in the business world, but this time with a completely different purpose. He called former contacts who had disappeared during his fall, not to ask for help for himself, but to ask them to consider donating to the foundation. Some hung up, others laughed, but some, surprisingly, responded. Marcus Chen, a former competitor who had always respected Donovan despite their business rivalry, was the first to make a significant donation. "You always knew how to do business, Sterling," he said during a meeting at a modest cafe. "But this is different. This is building a real legacy." Earl not only donated furniture to auction, but began teaching carpentry to neighborhood youth on weekends, giving them practical skills and a sense of purpose. The library where Willa worked became the foundation's headquarters. On Saturday afternoons, they organized reading sessions for children from foster homes. Donovan, who months before wouldn't have known how to interact with a child, discovered he had patience to explain complex stories in simple terms, to listen to their questions without condescension. One afternoon, an 8-year-old girl named Sophie approached him after a reading session. "Mr. Donovan," she said shyly, "is it true you were rich and lost everything?" Donovan crouched to be at her level, looking into her eyes. "It's true," he responded honestly. "And are you sad?" He thought carefully before responding. "You know what, Sophie? At first, yes, I was sad. Very sad. But then I realized something important. When I was rich, I had many things, but I didn't have what really matters." "What really matters?" the girl asked, her eyes big and curious. "People who love you for who you are, not for what you have," he explained. "Doing things that help other people, feeling proud of yourself when you look in the mirror. Those things can't be bought with money." Sophie thought for a moment, then smiled. My foster mom says the same thing. She says love is free, but it's the most valuable thing in the world. Your foster mom is very wise, Donovan responded, feeling warmth in his chest. When Sophie went to join her foster mother, Willa approached Donovan, who remained crouched in the same place. You're crying, she observed softly. I'm happy, he responded, wiping his tears. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that truly matters, and it's all thanks to you. Willa knelt beside him, taking his face in her hands. No, Donovan, this is thanks to you. I just showed you the way. You chose to walk it. You chose to change. That takes courage not everyone has. True wealth isn't measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give. Real success isn't in reaching the top, but in lifting others along the way. And sometimes, our greatest losses become the most valuable opportunities to discover who we're meant to be. But not everything was light on this new path. The past has a way of returning when we least expect it, and for Donovan, that return took the form of a phone call on a July afternoon. Mr. Sterling, the voice on the other end of the line was formal, legal. I'm Attorney Morrison. I represent several of your former investors who suffered significant losses in the collapse of your companies. Donovan felt his stomach sink. I understand, he responded, keeping his voice steady. What can I do for you? They're considering legal action, though technically it wasn't fraud. They feel there was negligence in due diligence. They want compensation. I don't have anything to give, Donovan said honestly. I lost as much as they did, if not more. That's what we feared, the attorney sighed. But I must warn you, they're going to proceed anyway. Any assets you have now, or in the future, could be subject to seizure. That includes, he paused significantly, any new business or foundation you're establishing. The threat was clear. The foundation they had just started, the purpose he had finally found, everything could be destroyed before it truly took off. That night, Donovan couldn't sleep. He paced the small apartment like a caged animal, his mind racing with possibilities and none of them good. Willa watched him from the couch where she had been reading. Tell me, she said simply. He explained everything. The call, the legal threats, the possibility of losing everything again, including the foundation. Maybe I should give up, he murmured, collapsing on the couch beside her. Maybe the universe is trying to tell me I don't deserve a second act. Willa closed her book sharply, the sound making Donovan startle. No, she said with a firmness she rarely showed. I'm not going to let you give up now. Not after everything you've worked for, everything you've changed. But Willa, if I lose the foundation... The foundation isn't you, she interrupted. It's important, yes, but it doesn't define your value. You changed, Donovan. You grew, you learned. No one can take that from you. No lawyer, no judge, no court order. She stood, walking to the window overlooking the street illuminated by streetlights. When I was in the hospital thinking I might die, you know what scared me most? She asked without turning. It wasn't death itself. It was the idea that I might leave without having made a real difference, without having helped enough people, without having loved enough. She turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. But then I saw you there, night after night, day after day. I saw how you read to other patients when they couldn't sleep. I saw how you befriended the nurses and learned the names of the cleaning staff. I saw how you transformed from a man who measured success in numbers to one who measures it in smiles and shared moments. She walked back toward him, kneeling in front of the couch. So we're going to fight this, she declared. We're going to find a lawyer to help us. We're going to be completely transparent about our finances, and if we have to start the foundation from scratch, under a different name, without any assets of yours involved, then that's what we'll do. Because this work is bigger than us, Donovan. It's bigger than money or lawsuits or fear. Donovan looked at her, this 23-year-old woman who had overcome more adversity in her short life than most would experience in an entire existence, and felt something solidify in his chest. It wasn't just love, though it certainly was. It was respect, admiration, and a determination that came from knowing he wasn't alone in this fight. How did you become so strong? He asked with admiration. Willa smiled through her tears. I'm not strong all the time. Sometimes I cry in the shower where no one can see. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed and scared. But I learned that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. And it's much easier to be brave when you're not alone. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions and legal challenges. Donovan contacted a pro bono attorney who had done work for the foundation, explaining the situation. The attorney, James Rodriguez, a 50-year-old man with a reputation for defending lost causes, agreed to review the case. "Look, Sterling," he said, after reviewing the documents, "legally you're in a difficult position. Technically you didn't do anything illegal, but in the current climate, investors have certain rights. However, there's something we can do." "What?" Donovan asked, hopeful. "We can structure the foundation so it's completely separate from you legally. Willa can be the official founder. You can work as a volunteer, no salary, no assets in your name. It's not ideal, but it would allow you to continue the work without putting the foundation at risk." It was a solution that required Donovan to let go of even the last vestige of control and ownership. He would have to completely trust Willa, her vision, her leadership. When James left the apartment that afternoon, Donovan turned to Willa. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," she responded without hesitation. "Because it was never about you or me individually. It was always about us together, building something bigger than either of us." "Are you sure? About carrying all that responsibility?" Willa approached him, taking his hands. "I'm sure that together we can do this. And I'm sure that I trust you as much as I hope you trust me. You don't need your name on the legal documents for this to be yours. What we build together, no matter how it looks on paper." Sometimes the greatest show of strength is letting go of control. Sometimes completely trusting another is the bravest act we can perform. And sometimes losing our name in something is the only way to find our true purpose. Autumn returned to New York with its characteristic mix of melancholy and beauty. Leaves fell from trees in Central Park, carpeting the paths with golden and reddish tones. It was almost exactly 1 year since that rainy morning when Donovan had first seen Willa step into the muddy puddle to help an elderly woman. The foundation, now legally under Willa's name with Donovan as principal volunteer, had grown more than anyone had anticipated. They had helped more than 100 children, established 3 community libraries in underserved neighborhoods, and created a mentorship program connecting professionals with at-risk youth. But the defining moment came unexpectedly. Constance Sterling Monroe requested a meeting with her son. It wasn't an order. It wasn't manipulation. It was a simple question, sent through a text message that surprised Donovan with its brevity and humility. "Can we talk? I miss you." They agreed to meet at a cafe on Fifth Avenue, a neutral place full of people, where the weight of their family history would feel less oppressive surrounded by everyday life. Donovan arrived early, watching people pass by, young couples holding hands, families with children chasing pigeons, street artists creating ephemeral art with chalk on the sidewalks. All of this would have been invisible to him a year ago. Now it was all he saw. Constance appeared exactly on time, dressed elegantly but less ostentatiously than before. Her eyes, so similar to his, showed something he had never seen: uncertainty. "Mother," he greeted her, and was surprised to feel genuine warmth in the word. "Donovan," she responded, and her voice trembled slightly. They sat at one of the outdoor tables, ordering coffee without the usual demands for specific brands or elaborate preparations. "I've been following your work," Constance began after a tense silence. "The foundation. What you're doing for those children." Donovan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "How?" "I have my sources." A small smile touched her lips. "And I made a donation, anonymous, through an intermediary." "You?" He couldn't hide his astonishment. Constance looked at her coffee, her perfectly manicured hands trembling slightly around the cup. "I was a terrible mother," she said abruptly, the words coming out as if she'd been holding them too long. Not in the traditional sense. I fed you, clothed you, gave you education, but I never gave you what you really needed." "Mother." "No, let me finish," she interrupted, and there were tears forming in her eyes. "I taught you to value the wrong things. I taught you that appearances mattered more than substance. I molded you in my image, and my image was empty." She took a deep breath before continuing. "When your father died, you were 7 years old. Do you remember?" Donovan nodded. The memory was blurry but persistent. "He was like you've become," Constance continued. Kind, generous, more concerned with people than profits. And when he died, I was so scared of ending up poor and alone that I did everything opposite to what he would have wanted. I built walls of money and status, thinking they would protect me. And in doing so, I built walls between us too. Tears now flowed freely down her face, and Constance made no effort to hide them. I saw how I treated Willa, she admitted. I saw the pain in her eyes during that horrible dinner. And I hated her, not because she was poor or young, but because she represented everything I had lost long ago. The ability to love without calculation, the strength to be vulnerable, the courage to be authentic. Donovan felt his own throat tighten with emotion. When you lost everything, Constance continued, part of me felt justified. See, I told myself, this is what happens when you don't protect what you have. But then I saw you rebuild. I saw you happy in ways you never were when you had everything. And I realized that I was the one who was wrong, not you. She extended a trembling hand across the table, and after a moment of hesitation, Donovan took it. I don't expect your forgiveness, Constance said, but I hope I can get to know the man you've become. And maybe, if she allows it, get to know the woman who helped you find yourself. Donovan squeezed his mother's hand, feeling decades of pain and resentment begin to loosen. She forgave you long ago, he said, before you even thought of asking for forgiveness. That's the kind of person she is. Then she's better than me, Constance responded with a sad smile. Not better, Donovan corrected. Just different. You never had anyone show you another path. But it's not too late to learn. What followed was a moment Donovan would never forget. His mother, this high society woman who had spent decades perfecting an image of invulnerability, cried openly in a public cafe on Fifth Avenue. And he held her, without shame, without concern for who might be watching. People passed by, some looking with curiosity, others with understanding. But Donovan paid them no attention. For the first time in his life, he was truly present with his mother, not as a son fulfilling expectations, but as a human being connecting with another. When they finally calmed down, Constance dried her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "Bring her to dinner," she asked. "Not at my penthouse, not with all that ostentation. I'll cook myself at my place. Something simple. And I promise to try to be the person your father would have wanted me to be." That night, when Donovan returned to the apartment, Willa greeted him with a curious smile. "How was it?" He took her in his arms, holding tightly. "Healing," he responded. "And scary, and necessary. But above all, I owe it to you." "You don't owe me anything," Willa protested. "I owe you everything," he insisted. "You showed me that people can change. And in doing so, you gave my mother the example that she can too. That's a gift beyond any price." That night, as they lay in their modest bed in their small apartment, with the sound of New York filtering through the open windows, Donovan realized something profound. It wasn't the money he had lost that had impoverished him all those years. It was the lack of real connections, of authentic vulnerability, of love that wasn't conditional on his success or status. And now, with less than ever in material terms, he was richer than he had ever imagined possible. The true climax of our lives doesn't come with external victory, but with internal reconciliation. Not with the conquest of others, but with the surrender of our own pride. And sometimes the most powerful moments happen in ordinary public cafes, where shared humanity overcomes all the walls we've built. 18 months after that first encounter in the rain, Donovan found himself standing in a place he never would have imagined. The small courtyard of the orphanage upstate New York, where Willa had grown up. It was a spring day, with the scent of jasmine filling the air and the sound of children laughing inside the building. The whitewashed walls gleamed under the sun, and the geraniums Willa had loved caring for as a child still bloomed in terracotta pots along the corridor. Sister Mary, now 70 years old, but with eyes that shone with the same kindness she had shown an orphaned girl decades ago, was there. So was Constance, who had made the trip from Manhattan along with Lenora, Earl and his wife, and dozens of children the foundation had helped. There were no elaborate decorations, no expensive banquet, just simple tables with white tablecloths, vases of wildflowers picked that morning, and homemade food prepared by the orphanage sisters and neighborhood residents. Willa emerged from the building, not in a designer dress, but in a simple white cotton dress she had embroidered herself with small flowers during quiet evenings. She was barefoot as she insisted on being, her feet touching the warm stones of the courtyard where she had played as a child. There was no formal wedding march, just the sound of an acoustic guitar played by one of the teenagers from the Foundation's mentorship program, interpreting a melody Willa had once hummed and Donovan had remembered. When she reached his side, taking his hands in hers, Donovan saw their entire journey reflected in her eyes. The arrogant man he had been, the collapse that had shattered him, the rebuilding that had transformed him, and now this, the promise of a future built not on fortunes or possessions, but on shared love and purpose. Sister Mary officiated the ceremony, her words simple but profound. "Love is not a feeling," she began. "It's a choice we make every day. It's getting up when you'd rather stay in bed. It's listening when you'd rather speak. It's forgiving when it hurts. Say it's staying when it would be easier to leave." She looked directly at Donovan. "You've learned these lessons the hard way, but you've learned them. And now you must promise this woman that you'll continue choosing every day to grow in humility and love." Then she turned to Willa. "And you, my child, who has known loss but never lost hope, must promise to help him remember these lessons when the world tries to make him forget. That you'll be his anchor in the storm and his compass when he's lost." There were no elegantly written vows. Instead, Donovan spoke from the heart, his voice trembling with emotion. "Willa, a year and a half ago, I thought I knew what success was. I thought I knew what wealth was. I was completely wrong. You taught me that success is looking back on your day and knowing you made a difference, however small. That wealth is having someone who loves you in your worst moments as much as your best. I promise to spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the love you give me so freely. I promise to fall and rise, fail and learn, be imperfect, but always honest. And I promise I'll never forget the lessons you've taught me about what truly matters." Willa responded, tears running down her cheeks, but smiling more brightly than Donovan had ever seen her. "Donovan, when I saw you that day in the rain, I saw someone who was lost, but I also saw someone who wanted to be found. You showed me that people can change, that walls can come down, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. I promise to be your partner on this journey, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you. I promise to celebrate your victories and hold you in your defeats. And I promise to love you not despite your imperfections, but with them because they make us human. They make us real." When they kissed, it was under the sky that had seen Willa grow from a scared girl to a strong woman. It was in the place where she had learned that family is choice, not blood, and it was surrounded by all the people who represented their new world. Not a world of status or money, but of genuine connections and shared purpose. The celebration that followed was simple but perfect. Children running between tables laughing, Constance helping serve food, her elegant hands now doing humble work without complaint. Earl teaching some of the older boys basic carpentry techniques in a corner of the courtyard. Lenora organizing a game for the younger ones, and in the center of it all, Donovan and Willa dancing barefoot on the warm stones while the guitar played and the sun slowly descended toward the horizon. Sister Mary approached Constance, who watched the scene with silent tears. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" the nun said softly. "It is," Constance responded, "and frightening, to see how much time I wasted valuing the wrong things. But you're here now," Sister Mary pointed out. "That's what matters. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we live forward." Constance nodded, watching her son laugh in a way she had never seen. Without guards, without masks, completely present. As the sun set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Donovan led Willa to a quiet corner of the courtyard. He handed her a small package wrapped in simple paper. "It's not much," he said, "but I wanted to give you something that means something real." Willa opened the package carefully. Inside was a simple wooden frame, clearly handmade, and in the frame a photo of them both in Earl's workshop, covered in wood dust, laughing. It wasn't a professional photo. It had been taken by Lenora on her phone, but it captured something perfectly real. Two people completely present, completely themselves, completely happy. But beneath the photo, Donovan had carved words into the wood with his own hands. "This is where the real began, where the man I was started to die and the man I could be started to live. Thank you for seeing in me what I couldn't see. I love you not for what you make me feel, but for who you help me be. Willa pressed the frame against her chest, crying openly now. It's perfect, she whispered. Completely perfect. As they returned to the celebration, walking hand in hand under a sky that was darkening but seemed brighter than ever, Donovan realized something with crystal clarity. This was his happy ending. Not because everything was perfect, not because all problems were solved, not because they had material wealth or guarantees the future would be easy, but because they had found something no amount of money could buy: shared authenticity, mutual purpose, and a love that had been forged not in easy moments, but in the fire of real transformation. The story of Willa and Donovan wasn't about a poor girl who found a rich prince. It was about two people, each with their own wounds and scars, who found each other at the exact moment both were ready to heal. It was about learning that sometimes we need to lose everything to find the only thing that truly matters. And as the stars began to appear over the orphanage courtyard, as the music continued playing and the children continued laughing, as two families that should never have mixed blended perfectly, the truth was undeniable. Sometimes the most beautiful stories aren't about finding love. They're about allowing love to find us, change us, break us, and rebuild us into something infinitely better than we were before. They're about the courage to let go of who we thought we should be, to discover who we truly are. They're about two imperfect people creating together something perfectly real. And that, more than any fairy tale ending, is the truest magic of all. True love isn't finding someone perfect, but seeing someone imperfect perfectly. It's not about changing another person, but allowing them to help transform us. And sometimes the greatest love story isn't about two people who meet, but about two people who choose each other, again and again, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because they know that together they're more complete than apart.